Well, Secretary Buttigieg, welcome to Houston, welcome to the port. I mean, this big announcement today, what is the significance? Why should Houstonians care about what's happening here?
Well, this port generates so many jobs, and even if you or somebody you know doesn't work in and around an industry that's directly supported by this port, chances are every time you go to the store, you're benefiting from goods that come in and out of here. Everything you can think of, including probably the device you're using to watch this interview, if you're a viewer, moved through America's ports, and Houston is a big part of that. It's become the fifth top port in the country, and that's important not just for imports, but also exports, American products that we are shipping overseas and bringing that income to families right here in America.
You mentioned that it's now in the top 5. It's not like number 1, 2, 3. I mean, how much of a difference can infrastructure improvements here make overall for the nation's supply chain?
Well, it's a huge deal. So you've got ships getting bigger and bigger, and that means they need bigger and bigger channels to move through. Now, if you eyeball this Gulf, you would think they have plenty of room, but actually the average depth around here is about 7 feet. And these massive ships equipped to go through the Panama Canal need a channel dredged to a greater depth and a greater width. The administration is supporting that work so that more ships can be served and larger ships as well. All of that adds to the capacity of the port. That means more goods moving through here. That means more jobs. It's great for the Gulf Coast. It's great for Houston. And it's an important part of the overall big picture of American economic strength. You know, supply chains didn't used to be a thing that most people talked about, but ever since 2021 and what we saw on the rebound from the pandemic, I think people realize we really count on every part of our supply chains, and ports are, of course, a critical link.
I also want to ask you about the railroad crossings, because Houston did get a big chunk of federal money last month or in June to eliminate some railroad crossings. What was it about Houston's issues particularly that stood out to the federal government to award that grant to Houston?
Well, this is the first time we've had a program like this, and it was very competitive. We got applications from all around the country. One of the reasons why we chose the Houston project is that it showed the benefits that were going to come in terms of safety and in terms of quality of life. When you have these crossings, especially on busy roads, it means that there's, of course, a higher risk of collisions. It means that there's a lot of just inconvenience waiting for these trains to go by, especially if they get stalled, slowed, or stopped. And it can delay emergency vehicles from getting to where they need to be. So that's one of many reasons why the package that was put together here in Houston for that project was a successful one. And this is just one example of what's in the President's bipartisan infrastructure package that we never had before. There was never a dedicated fund just for improving or eliminating these railroad crossings. So we're really excited to see that project get completed, and we hope there's going to be more where that came from.
On that note, of course, this isn't eliminating every railroad crossing in Houston. I mean, there are still people that we hear from, viewers all the time, who are saying how long they're waiting at these rail crossings. So is there any hope you could offer, any potential for more of that in Houston?
Yeah, another thing I want to point to is that we've set up an online portal to collect information when people are experiencing these blocked crossings. We never had a systematic way to get that data before. When we see the hotspots from people reporting it in, we can turn around and engage the railroads directly to try to clear that area. So it's not just these big projects that we'll be able to do in a few places to actually eliminate them entirely, but making sure across the country where we have more than 200,000 railroads crossing streets or roads, that we get the best results. Of course, railroads need to operate their business, but that shouldn't be at the expense of communities.
Switching to airlines now, Texans have not forgotten what happened holiday travel season, still having some problems this summer with cancellations, delays. We know that there's this investigation for airlines operating unrealistic schedules. What specific airlines are you looking into?
Well, I can't do too many investigative details right now while it's in process, but what I will say is anytime we find that an airline has operated an unrealistic schedule, there's going to be a consequence to that. Just as through millions of dollars of fines, we've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars in refunds back to passengers who had airlines that were not living up to their end of the bargain. We require airlines to refund passengers when your flight gets canceled, and we have a whole new set of passenger protections compared to even 1 year ago in terms of what to expect when you experience a disruption. Now, the good news is, after a lot of pressure on the airlines, that rate of cancellations, delays, disruptions has come back to normal. It's actually a little bit below average, but when it does happen to you, you don't care about the statistics, you just want to be taken care of. That's why we push so hard on those passenger protections and rights.
So what can you say? I mean, are airlines actually operating unrealistic schedules
What
today?
I say is we've had good cause to open a number of investigations, and those investigations will come to their conclusion, and I can't speak ahead of time on that. But we're taking this issue very seriously because it can be an issue of unfair competition as well as an issue of passenger convenience if an airline books a ticket, takes the money, and knows that they're unlikely to be able to actually serve that route well.
People are now starting to book their holiday travel once again. I mean, based on the changes that have happened throughout the last several months, do you think that they should be confident in making those plans at this time?
Well, anybody thinking about booking a ticket, I would encourage you to go to flightrights.gov to get more information from us about how the different airlines treat their passengers when an issue comes up. We've seen a lot of progress, definitely dramatic improvements compared to a year ago, and right now actually on track to be below the 10-year average in terms of cancellations and delays. But that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. Not only is there always the threat of weather, but also more issues that need to be resolved, both with airlines and within the air traffic control system. It's one of the things that we're working with Congress right now to get more funding, so we have the people and the technology to keep flights moving smoothly.
That's the thing, weather. I mean, the airlines like to blame that, and people are told that's why their flight's been either canceled or delayed. Can they be held responsible in any other way when they're saying weather is the issue, but oftentimes we've learned there are other kind of dominoes that are falling at the same time?
Yeah, Southwest Airlines is a good example of this. So they got hit with storms. Everybody got hit with storms, and we know that nobody controls the weather. But there was one airline that had trouble recovering, and that's when we saw that it was an internal problem there. We know that weather could strike any day, especially this year. We're seeing a lot of extreme weather events, and we expect there will be more where that came from going into this decade. But airlines need to be resilient enough, and they need to have invested enough in their systems that when they do get hit by those disruptions, they can recover quickly. If one airline is unable to recover when all the others have, to us that's a warning sign and an indication that we need to investigate what's going on at that particular airline.
Okay. How much time do we have?
About 3 or 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes, okay. I-45 expansion, that's been controversial here in Houston for years. People who say that, the highway should not be expanded, people will be displaced. There's an agreement that's been reached to move forward with construction. Why do you think that agreement is the right step, the right way forward?
Well, it was very important to us from early on when we heard all of the community concerns and even legal issues around this highway expansion that if it was going to be built, it needed to be on much better terms than we found it. Through a long and painstaking process with a lot of community engagement, there's a new way forward that recognizes and respects the communities that could be impacted. And I think we need to, first of all, follow through and make sure those commitments are met. And secondly, remember this as we look at other cases around the country. Look, we're not saying you can never expand a road anywhere ever. What we are saying is that when there's a need to expand a highway or have a right-of-way that goes through an area that wasn't a highway before, it is very, very important to go through all of the alternatives to include the community, to make sure there are measures to counteract displacement, because we have a history in this country of doing the wrong thing in the past. We're going to do the right thing going forward.
We're talking about these big projects, multi-million-dollar projects, but there was just a poll that came out this week here in Houston of likely voters in November, and their top 3 issues include just basic road conditions, getting to and from work every day. Sure, there's some local responsibility, but what can the federal government do to help? People are dealing with it every day.
I used to be a mayor, and the war between mayors and potholes is one that I remember being on the front lines of, and a lot of it does come down to funding. Of course, we recognize and respect that a lot of this is a matter of local decision-making and leadership, but one thing that also is very important is that we have more federal support than we've ever had before. And whether we're talking about the funding we're putting into what was called Safe Roads and Streets for All, which includes streetscape improvements, or what's called the Raise Grant Program, which is how we're funding the improvements on Telephone Road. We want to make sure that we are creating a tailwind to help local communities, counties, and cities deal with those basic road conditions that do reflect the general issue that we've had in this country for a long, long time, up until the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, of just not investing enough in our basic transportation infrastructure.
And completely off topic of infrastructure, Texas has 2 laws that are going into effect September 1st. One is the so-called drag ban. The other is banning gender-affirming care for minors in the state. What message does legislation like that send to LGBTQ Texans?
Well, look, it tells a lot of Texans that they are not safe or not welcome, and it's especially heartbreaking to hear the stories of parents who are wondering whether their family is safe or whether their relationship with their kids is going to be intervened, if the governor is going to send somebody to separate them from their kids for no other reason than that they consulted a doctor on how to make sure that their kids are being safe and well treated. And I think the deeper message this sends is about priorities. Here we are celebrating tens of millions of dollars going into improving supply chains at the Port of Houston, and you have some figures in elected office who've decided of all of the issues they could work on, of all of the things they could do with the time and the power and the money that has been placed in their hands, when they could be lowering the cost of prescription drugs or helping to make sure infrastructure is where it needs to be, that they're concentrating their efforts on making life harder for teenagers who already have life pretty hard. I'm just mystified that anybody would get up in the morning and make that their priority when we're working so hard to build roads and bridges and ports and airports and do other things to make everybody better off.